day. Apologies, I couldn't also join earlier. I would have loved to hear what everyone else is up to. So I am planning to stay for the rest of the meeting and come to the next ones as well. So really excited to get to know you all eventually. I thought I'd start off before going into the in-depth presentation by just introducing you all to Oaktree. I'm not sure how many people on this call have heard of us before, but we are a completely youth-run organisation focusing on international development. So we work to upskill young activists around our region in particular, so the Asia Pacific region, to create changes in the way that their community are operating to benefit sustainable development initiatives. So our main flagship program at the moment is something called the Youth Solidarity Fund. So we're working with young people across the Asia Pacific and providing them and backing them with the resources, financially and knowledge resources as well, to implement social impact initiatives. So we're backing young people currently in Cambodia who are working on preserving First Nations languages in their communities. We're going to be working with young people in Asia and the broader Pacific on things like gender equality, climate change. So the issue itself is not specific. It's more about empowering young people to take their ideas for social impact and make it a reality. So that's pretty much who Oaktree is. And one of our major campaigns that we will be launching this year is actually off the back of some research that we conducted last year into youth participation and international law frameworks surrounding youth participation. So what I might do, if I can, Sam, is share my screen, if that would be okay.
Yeah, has that option come up for you now, Linu?
I think so. Can you all see what do you see
that's great.
now? Just the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So this was actually part of my own postgraduate studies into law, looking at particular rights that young people are afforded in our international human rights framework. So I know I'm talking to a group of people who work with young people every day, so I won't spend too much time on the background of this. But I think for a very long time, a couple of decades now, we've had this idea that young people should be at the forefront of global change and innovation. And I've included this quote by the very famous Kofi Annan that explains why it's important to let young people have an opportunity to participate fully in the lives of their societies. And for us at Oaktree, from a development theory point of view as well, we really take that approach of giving young people the power to figure out what the problem is and to provide solutions themselves. We don't go into communities and say, we're going to fix the problem. We ask them what the problem is, and we empower them to participate in their societies and fix those problems themselves. So this quote really resonated with us and provided some of the basis on which we embarked on this research. So the first thing that I'll explain is the way that we're conceptualizing this new framework that we're going to be talking about today. So usually when we talk about youth participation, we're talking about it in a utilitarian sense and point of view. So a utilitarian approach frames young people as resources who can contribute to decision-making processes. So the key word here is resources. So young people are invited into these spaces without necessarily challenging the existing power relations between youth and adults in whether it's civil society, government, the private sector, NGOs, et cetera, et cetera. So this utilitarian model means that older adults still maintain absolute authority over which young people and when young people are invited into decision-making spaces. So what we wanted to do at Oaktree is actually shift to a human rights-based approach, which frames youth participation as a mode of social change and a human right that can actually be claimed by a young person. So participation within a rights-based framework challenges existing hierarchies, involves young people gaining greater control, and actually just affects the way that they can then contribute to that space as well. And in result, the future of the communities that they're contributing to. But when we were looking more into frameworks to use in this human rights-based approach, we realized that there was a real philosophical and legal gap in the foundations that underpin participatory rights. So it's really under-theorized at the moment from an academic point of view and from a legal point of view as well. So the next thing I'll do before we talk more about this is define who we're describing as young people in this context. So we obviously work with young people from all over the world. So there's a really huge range of what different cultures and different contexts classify as young people. I won't go into the details now, but there are broad ranges of boundaries currently in existing international frameworks. So we are taking the broadest possible definition of young people. So we're defining young people as those aged between 15 and 35. And really what defines what a young person is in this situation is that, I guess, sort of intermediate period between being a child and being an adult. So that transition from independence to dependence. So the next thing is the big philosophical question that we had to answer before going into all the legal detail, which is why should young people be granted separate rights? Again, I won't go into too much detail because I know a lot of people on this call already work in this space. But I think the one thing to make really clear is that all people, by virtue of being human, are already granted rights. That's the whole concept of human rights. However, certain groups face special vulnerabilities or discrimination that require them to be afforded additional rights. So, for example, children under the age of 18 are undergoing continuous cognitive development, physical growth, and that requires them to remain dependent on adults, which is why we, for example, have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Basically, if you can identify a discrete group with discrete interests that deserve discrete protection, that should classify that group to have a special body of rights to ensure that they're protected within the broader population. So while young people do not need all the basic protections given to children, they do have unique vulnerabilities, as we have found, that older adults do not hold in many societies. So often young people are marginalized from mainstream society through inequalities in income, wealth and power, unemployment and underemployment. And I would love to hear more about how everyone on this call is working to reduce those inequalities in practice. But what we thought is that that really creates this discrete group of people who also deserve discrete protection. So when we look at the right to participate, the United Nations defines this notion as broadly the right to stand for election, to vote for representatives, and a few more other things as well. So it also includes, for example, the concept that all citizens should be involved in decision-making processes. It should involve them expressing their ideas, creating policies and programs, or even just being consulted on decisions by any form of authority. So by that, I mean, it could be anything from a family unit to large overarching governments. I'm not sure if anyone has worked directly with Hart's Ladder of Youth Participation and Child Participation before. I'm assuming a lot of you have, but this is something that has really guided a lot of development work, in particular over the last couple of decades. So it's trying to differentiate between what meaningful versus non-meaningful participation is. I'm assuming a lot of you have come across this before, so I won't go through it in detail again, but basically what Hart outlines is different steps of participation that range from manipulation. So for example, young people are just assigned tasks by adults, and it's really just trying to get an adult agenda through almost a tokenistic approach to involving young people, and it steps all the way to youth and adult equity, where people are co-designing, working together, and really being driven by young people being in power over the decisions that will affect them most. And so when we were looking at whether our current legal frameworks actually allow a right to participation, we also wanted to ensure that that right to participation didn't fall into some of these lower categories and give way to tokenism, decoration, or manipulation. So we did identify quite a few gaps when we were researching this phenomenon. The first of which is that the conventions of the rights of the child, which we usually draw upon to define how young people can be engaged, obviously only goes up to the age of 18. So if we look at number 12 here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but respect for children's views is a really, really important part of the convention. So what we found is that in international law, there is a binary distinction between children and adults. So there is this underlying assumption that young people suddenly do not face any special barriers to participation as soon as they pass the age of 18. So basically what this means is that once you pass the age of 18, you're covered just under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In these documents, there is a right to take part in the conduct of public affairs directly through freely or chosen representatives. But again, this doesn't take into account the power differentials that practically exist in society that systemically prevent young people between the ages of, let's say, 18 and 35 in claiming this right. So for us, what we also found is that there are actually regional instruments that attempt to fill this gap already. So the African Youth Charter, Article 11, actually highlights in depth some really great best practices on how young people can be brought into decision-making processes. So young people within the African Union can actually claim a right to participation through this regional instrument. Similarly, the Ibero-American Convention on the Rights of Youth also steps out some really meaningful participation practices. So people in this region, which is mostly in South America and some of Europe as well, can actually claim this right as well. But then the question remained for us, what about the rest of the world? A lot of the young people we work with are in the Asia Pacific region, and there is currently no law in the international frameworks that we can use as a basis for our advocacy. When we say that young people between the ages of 18 to 35 have a right, they actually currently don't, if we are taking it from that point of view and the international human rights frameworks. So, what we thought we would do this year is begin raising awareness about this gap. We totally understand that it's a really slow moving process, international law, and for a lot of people, it's a toothless tiger as well. So there is very fair criticisms about whether we should even be bothering addressing this gap and whether it's the best use of our time. A report actually in 2018 by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights actually identified that there should be considered a possibility of an international instrument covering youth rights to counter the barriers and discrimination faced by young people all over the world. But because it's not a high priority, it was never taken forward, and there hasn't been a global campaign to raise awareness about the need for something like this. So for us, what raising awareness about this can actually do is raise awareness for young people and the right that we should have to be in these decision-making spaces. So like existing conventions for marginalized groups, such as, for example, the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Convention on the Elimination, I think it's called, all forms of discrimination against women. These are all instruments that I guess practically don't necessarily have a binding legal effect on a lot of countries, but act as a really important advocacy tool for all of these marginalized groups. So it, in essence, provides a standard on which our society should operate and approach this problem. So for us, what we're hoping to achieve through this campaign is bring about a legal basis on which young people from around the world can actually advocate for meaningful participatory rights. I'll probably finish up here just by saying that action on issues such as climate change, I think we can say really, really slow. And it's clear that what this means is that our future is not being prioritized by the people who are currently in decision-making spaces. So the campaign that we are hoping to launch this year is ultimately to raise awareness about this gap and also realize that we can no longer wait for an invitation to decision-making tables. So we can't rely on that utilitarian approach anymore. Young people should have a right to take their place at that table and really take it for themselves as the largest stakeholders in our future. And that's what we're hoping to do. And would love to chat about how we can build a coalition around this issue and any other thoughts you all have on it as well. So I might open up to questions here, Sam, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lena. That's absolutely fascinating. There's so much so much detail in the work that you've done, and it's clearly just an overview, but there was so much to pull in there. The information, the theories, the lack of international frameworks, but the localized knowledge is not something I've actually seen before. So that was, I took a lot away from your presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, has anybody got any questions for Thinu? They'd like to turn their mic on. You can also use the chat box as well. Oh yeah, Emily Grex from the Y. I'll pass to you.
Yeah, thank you, Thinu. That was awesome. Loved it. What I'd also love to know, just a little bit more detail about how this theory and practice that you've done, which is so extensive, is informing like the next 12 months of like what Oaktree's up to. Would love to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently still in the stage of ideating exactly what that campaign could look like. So really discussing with people who have run successful campaigns at this level before on what touch points we should be aiming for. But we've actually been really lucky to work in conjunction with Melbourne Law School, who are really backing us on this campaign and want to add that academic element to it as well. So what we're really hoping to do is start engaging a coalition of youth-run organisations around the world to really make it global, and start by, for the next 12 months, coming in December, we hope, with what we think would be best practice surrounding youth participation in this space. And we'd really like to come up with a one or two page document that outlines what those practices should be, almost like some other human rights advocacy campaigns in the past, which have had like little mini declarations that have been done by non-UN or non-international law NGO coalitions to highlight what that best practice should be. So for the next 12 months, it's really gaining public support and attention and awareness around this issue. And hopefully by December, we can have that coalition to craft what we think a best practice rights framework would look like so that we can continue advocacy in years to come.
Sounds amazing. Thank you.
No, thanks for that question. We're still very much in the ideation section of the campaign though. So if anyone has any ideas or even any challenges to it, I think that's what we're really wanting at the moment to cover all our bases.
Yeah, so good. And it'd be great to get, updates as you go, Thinu, whether that's giving us an update when you come along to meetings in the future or just sending through an email as there's significant milestones or interest. Because I think it crosses over with our work so significantly, the work that most of us are doing either locally or statewide, or nationally even. We've got a representative from AYAC, Australian Youth Affairs Coalition, here today, so working on a federal level about the rights of young people to be engaged in decision-making processes that affect them. And so it'd be great to find out how you go with this. Has anybody else got any questions for Thinu? Either pop your mic on or use the chat box as well. Something I was reading about over the Christmas break actually was about that progression from dependence to independence to then potentially to interdependence, which wasn't a theory I'd particularly considered previously, but I think that's a really interesting concept, particularly when you look at Hart's ladder of participation, whereby the top level is about partnership. He doesn't use the phrase interdependence, but I think that's where that's potentially leading, the fact that as a society we're stronger when we work together, rather than the emphasis being the limit being about independence. It's actually about us creating cohesive societies by working together, which just jumped up in my mind as you were speaking because of the focus that you've had there. Lucy's asked, have you done consultation with young people, and if so, what were your processes? And enjoyed the presentation.
First of all, I'll just say that's a really interesting point, Sam, and would love to be set any reading around that as well, because I think it's really interesting how we conceptualize this idea of youthhood, and I've read a lot of papers, and it's really interesting how that conception has also changed across time. Like, for example, 30 years ago, the way that young people were described is very different from how young people are described now. And I think there is also a broadening gap on who we define as a young person now that we're living much older and things like that as well. So would love to learn more about that. And in answer to Lucy's question, so the initial research that we did was purely academic and like through academic resources, but we are not embarking on this campaign without a really, really thorough consulting process with young people from around the world. So we want a really great cross-section of people who, for example, have already lived under a youth rights framework, say in the African Union, and compare it to the experiences of young people in, let's say, the Asia Pacific who aren't currently covered by such a right. So yeah, I think for us, because we are youth-led and we're all young people working on this campaign, that consulting is really important. And we want to make sure that we take a really intersectional approach to this work as well. And I actually would love to draw upon a comment made by Jason, which was, how can we lean on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? Because all of this is so intersectional, right? Like young people face similar discrimination based on their ethnicity, their culture, their sexuality, their ability. And I think for us, everything we do is intersectional, and we would really like to draw upon that as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that comment, Jason. And the rights of First Nations people as well, I guess, features somewhere in your thinking. And yeah, Dean's commented, coalition, where do we sign up, Fina? And I think it's a great point. Like, I think I've said to you already that YACVIC will be super interested in this project and offering what support we can with the advocacy that you're doing and the sharing of the findings that you have, the advocacy that you do. But potentially the YPPN could play a role as well, as a slightly different aspect and a different approach in terms of the way that we can offer some support. So maybe that's something that we can explore further in the future as well.
Yeah, that would be incredible. What I might do is pop my email in the chat. If you are interested in staying up to date with how the campaign is going and want to be involved in the early stages of crafting as well, please do shoot me an email. We'd love you to be involved.
Yeah, great. And I'm thinking there'll be young people connected to all of our services and projects that will be interested in global development and global rights of young people. So if you're ever looking to spread the word to have young people involved in this project, either in the co-design process, consultation process, or in other ways, again, just let us know and we can share that across the network. But we've taken up a bit more of your time than I was planning to, Fina. So thank you so much for presenting today. You said you're going to stick around for the rest of the meeting. So if anybody's got other questions, please feel free to